So thank you, Brother Richard, for sitting down once again with Behind the Final Call cover story. Man, it's a lot going on in the news as usual, but this is, of course, volume number 38, number 26, and the date on the paper is April 2nd. And of course, as I always ask, why this cover story? Southern Poverty Law Center, selling hatred and pushing fear.
Well, assalamu alaikum, Brother Troy. Thank you for having me. This story I think is a very important one for a couple reasons. The Southern Poverty Law Center has been around since the 1970s, and it initially made its reputation fighting the Ku Klux Klan and Klan organizations. Over time, however, the group has grown, its power, its influence has grown, and it has amassed a tremendous fundraising operation. It has about $1 trillion. Has about $500 billion in assets, funding, etc. $500 billion. It dwarfs similar groups like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and others that fight for justice as this group is supposed to do. Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center has become known for this ranking or report, if you will, about quote-unquote hate groups. That's where the problem begins, in particular for us in the Nation of Islam, because it has listed the Nation of Islam as a hate group. We're not that, and we have fought that designation. Well, in recent weeks, the last 2 weeks, we've now come across an open secret, if you will. An open secret is this major organization, something like 400 employees in several states, very based in Montgomery, Alabama, very top heavy when it comes to whites in the leadership structure, decision making structure, blacks in the lower levels, and then questions about inequities in terms of power, racism within the organization. These charges, of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center has denied, as well as charges of sexism. So Morris Dees, the co-founder, was ousted a couple weeks ago, and we just had, as of Monday, which would have been March, let me see, what's the date, so that we don't confuse people. What would have been Monday, March, either between the 22nd and the 24th of March, the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Richard Cohen, also resigned. And now there's a whole move to try to now figure out what's wrong with the organization. But there have been now challenges, and there have been reports from different people who used to work there about how blacks were not necessarily advanced, and whether they were really involved in social justice or they were really involved in fundraising. The biggest thing, however, is these hate groups designations, which black organizations, including the Nation of Islam, the New Black Panther Party, and others are saying we have been unjustly painted with this charge. And so it becomes not only a matter of reputation, but it then becomes even possibly an excuse for law enforcement to investigate, right? If you're a hate group, and if you're putting us in the same category with these white supremacist groups that have a history of violence, history of depriving people of their rights. So this is a pretty important story, and we wanted everybody to really take a good look at it. The headline is Hypocrisy, Hate, Hype, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, written by our managing editor, Starla Muhammad. It's a great read, and it's amazing. The other thing, we talked to some black activists, in particular one in Alabama, who said she has asked this group, the Southern Poverty Law Center, to help in local fights, and they've never showed up. So this is a pretty good piece. And we know that Alabama has just a plethora of problems that remain, and a lot of it related to race and poverty. So where are they on that local front is what this activist and others have been asking. So it's a pretty powerful piece.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. There is a lot in this paper, not like there isn't always, but it was, I know we can't go through article by article, But I wanted to jump to the whites dumping pollution on black and poor people, pollution's deaths.
I mean, this is again another piece, and these are the kinds of pieces that we try to use to bring to our people's attention. And this is essentially a study that found that the air breathed by people in black communities can be dangerous to their health. That's not necessarily news, because we typically live closer to these toxic kind of environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the irony is that black people aren't necessarily directly responsible for the pollution that they consume. So the study looked at consumer behavior and the result of consumer behavior, right? You're buying certain products, you're using certain products. Those products come from a particular factory or manufacturer, and that manufacturer factory puts out a certain level of pollution. Well, it was found that the ones that are consuming the products that are creating the pollution that's impacting black people who live around these factories and manufacturers, the consumers are white. But the ones that are suffering the brunt of this, what they call environmental injustice or environmental racism, are black people. So again, it's a great piece, and this has been a long-standing problem. Long-standing, so this is now another manifestation of what we have to be on the lookout for. And so in this piece, there's a talk about not just stopping pollution, but the environmental justice side, proper development, maybe even compensation for those who have suffered. You know, we got something called Cancer Alley as you go through the South, where you've had these manufacturing plants, oil refineries, etc., and there just seems to be in these particular areas just a prevalence of cancers, different kinds of cancers. So again, we always want our people to kind of read and be aware so that we can understand what's happening in the world, and hopefully it will help us to decide what the proper course of action is to save ourselves, our families, and our communities.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I want to jump on a positive note, because when I turn the page, there's a lot that's going on in our community where we are definitely taking a position where we're taking responsibility for our reality, not expecting or thinking that others will stand up and take control, or not take control, but take responsibility for our people in the condition that we're in. So we have a few articles dealing with youth. There's the hundreds of students gathered for Young Men of Color Summit that occurred at Chicago State, which I know you participated in. But we also have the event, a mentoring program that occurred in, I believe, in Philadelphia. So can you share the importance of that and what's going on in those?
Well, the Young Men of Color Summit at Chicago State that I did participate in is essentially geared at encouraging and kind of orienting young black men to look at college, to look at higher education, but also to connect with groups and individuals that can help them make good decisions and pave their way to success. I mean, it was several hundred young people, Chicago Public School students. Very good, interesting session. I dealt with the topic of black male images, do they matter? And we had a very good discussion with the young men about these images, the history of these images, and then how these images impact policy and behaviors. So for example, we talked about the crack cocaine crisis, and we talked about the difference in sentencing. So crack cocaine, powder cocaine, same drug, different forms. But in the height of the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s, and even going into the 90s in terms of punishment, the sentencing ratio was 100 to 1. So for 1 gram of crack, the penalty was 100 times higher than a gram of cocaine, but the same drug. Well, why was that possible? Well, crack was seen as the drug of the violent inner city drug gang. Cocaine was seen as more of a suburban drug that's just kind of, you know, what the rich people do when they want to relax. So there wasn't that focus, there wasn't the penalty under law and it wasn't that same image. So we talked about not only these images, but what it means when somebody is able to use an image to deprive you of your livelihood, to deprive you of your freedom, or to deprive you of opportunity. So that was one. And then we had the FOI in Philly, great mentoring program at the Church of the Advocate. It was entitled Basketball and Barbershop Talks. And so the brothers were really just interacting with young people, bringing them in to talk about what we need to be doing, how we can combat crime and poverty, how we can find a better way to get along. Great session. Along with that, we also had Brother Nuri Muhammad earlier this year, was in West Philadelphia and delivered a message at a keynote address at a Philadelphia town hall meeting sponsored by Educational Opportunities for Families.
Yes,
so this is our work, the ongoing work of the resurrection, redemption, and the building up of our people and communities. And by Allah's grace, we try to do it every day in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'm fast forwarding and jumping a little far ahead because there's an article that I didn't get a chance to really read, but definitely was interesting to me, just even the title, Baldwin's Fire Next Time and Dinner with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Of course, this article was written by Jaran Muhammad, contributing writer. So, of course, there's a documentary that's out, right? Or that came out a year or so ago.
Yeah.
So can you tell me something about
Well,
this article?
in a sense, there's been a resurgence of some interest in James Baldwin as a writer. You know, we just had this movie, If Beale Street Could Talk, which was very popular. That's one of his creations. It's based on a book that he wrote. So, one, if he can get make the time to go check that out, find it somewhere, and support good black art. But Baldwin was the piece that you talked about is essentially a film, I Am Not Your Negro, where Baldwin talks about his politics, talks about the black struggle, talks about resistance. One of the classic Baldwin's works is called The Fire Next Time, published in 1963. And so Brother Jaran took a look back at that book, and in it talks about, and I never knew this, dinner with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and their discussions, and Baldwin's impressions, and as Baldwin tried to kind of look at the nation and explain the nation to others. I mean, so it's a pretty fascinating article. So one of the things that Baldwin says is that the dinner meeting was part of, well, he didn't say this, but it appears that the dinner meeting was part of his attempts, in public and in private, to, quote, explain the black Muslims NOI movement, explain how the black Muslims NOI movement came about, how it has achieved such force, was met with a blankness that revealed the little connection that liberals' attitudes have with their perceptions or their lives, or even their knowledge revealed, in fact, that they could deal with the Negro as a symbol or victim, but had no sense of him as a man. So Baldwin is saying, as he was trying to explain this thing about the nation, that even these liberals kind of couldn't get it, couldn't understand it. So again, check it out, very good story. And we're just trying to offer you different things that will both inform, entertain, and enlighten.
Well, I'm actually jumping back a little bit because the following story is actually the continuation of the story that's on page 4, dealing with the hunger strike with St. Clair. And of course, a brother who was unjustly moved from his perspective. So can you give us a little bit about that?
This is, again, brother, coming out of Alabama. You have 8 or 9, well, you know, Alabama, of course, is notorious for incarceration and conditions. So you've had a group of brothers organizing against violence in prison and organizing for the rights of inmates, organizing and calling for them to be treated like human beings. We talked to some of the brothers, well, they contacted us, and advocates for inmates contacted us and talked about what's happening in Alabama prisons now, where these brothers were moved for, the brothers say, for no reason, other than they were trying to get some order and get some rights and improve conditions in these prisons. So some of them were been on a hunger strike, and we just wanted to tell the story. It's not one that I think you would necessarily see other places, but one of the things that the brothers say in the article that I think is very important is we're not animals. And he talks about, if we're going to come back to the community, which most of us will do you want me to come back as an animal, or do you want to do something that gives me a fuller expression and development as a human being? So these brothers are really fighting in America now for basic human rights, basic human dignity. So check out the article, very good piece. And we have so many of our people incarcerated that we should never forget them. We should never forget their plight. We should never forget their struggle. And we should always hope and pray that they're able to find some level, some measure of redemption in these institutions. Otherwise, all you do is churn out better criminals, more deviated people, more dangerous people. Well, where are they coming to? They're coming right back to us. So the work of the Nation of Islam Prison Reform Ministry in particular is to help try to give these brothers a greater knowledge, wisdom, and understanding so that they can become renewed even when they're in prison. And many of the other inmates are also working along those same lines. So we really feel that instead of opposing this type of activity, that the authorities should look at it and then support it. But now, lastly, some of the advocates feel that part of the reasons why they want this image of prisoners and prisons out of control is to help justify the construction of even more prisons. So we need to check it out, read it, finalcall.com, get your digital subscription, get your print copy from the brothers on the street. Matter of fact, talk to the brothers. They can deliver to you in your city every week or meet you somewhere every week. But stay tuned. This is our 40th year, and we have a lot of work to do.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we're not going to stop reminding people that this is the 40th year, 40 years of this work, and we're continuing it. And even though we've been rocking this and doing this for 40 years, that doesn't mean that we don't need your help.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that we don't need your support, because, of course, the 40 years isn't just to reflect on what we have done, but as you've shared with me, there's a lot of plans on where we want to move forward.
Absolutely.
So we need your support to do that. Of course, I skipped over, but it's right inside of the cover. And I know this is one of those news topics that, you know, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard something about. And that's the Mueller report. Can you give us something about that?
Well, you can read about it at finalcall.com. But basically, of course, Robert Mueller, the special counsel, came back with a report looking at charges of collusion or some interactions between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, or Russian government officials or operatives. So he has completed the report. He's given it to Attorney General William Barr, who is now kind of making a decision about how much will be released. Mr. Barr has released a 4-page statement, if you will, that kind of talks about some aspects and says some things were not proven. But at the end of the day, the Democrats are still calling for the release of the full report. So the question becomes, will the Democrats suffer? Did they overreach in terms of what their expectation is? Or will the full report be released where people can see exactly what happened, exactly, because everything, some of the analysts say, well, things did not have to rise to the level of criminality for there to be reasons to be concerned, right? Mm-hmm. So you've had Mr. Manafort, the president's campaign manager, who's been convicted of crimes. His former lawyer, Michael Cohen, has pleaded guilty to crimes, and others. Michael Flynn, former national security person for the president. So they're saying all these things mean something. So we'll see how this plays out. But we say the acrimony isn't over. and the investigations aren't over. So we should stay tuned and see how this thing plays out, both in the legal arena as well as in the political arena.
Yes, sir. Now, we appear to have a few things that are going on internationally. If you could just hit on some of just what's going on in the world internationally right now.
Well, one of the major things, and before we get that, of course, in Nebraska, we've got U.S. farmers facing devastation from Midwest flooding. So the snow melts, and then it floods. We've had military facilities flooded, soybeans that were stored flooded, farmland flooded. So that's in here. But I think even more tragic is this major cyclone that hit southern Africa, that struck Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, and now there's a whole humanitarian crisis. So the United Nations has allocated $20 million for a humanitarian response. You're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of people impacted by this. So we're going to keep on following this, and we hope that we can let people know not only what's happening, but maybe there are some ways that we can help, some reputable groups we can spend money with. But just as other disasters are given prominence, we as Black people should be looking at this unfortunate circumstance and trying to figure out what can we do to help, because we know that our people almost always, even when you look at disasters like Haiti, money promised never delivered. Never delivered. So we don't want to see that happen in Southern Africa, but that means that we have to be engaged. That means that we have to understand. We probably need to reach out to our federal lawmakers, see what they are doing, see what the African nations are requesting, and look at organizations, and hopefully we can avert some of this suffering and avoid some loss of life. Very tragic and important situation right in Southern Africa. You can look for a follow-up article next week in the Final Call as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you. A lot going on in the world outside of that. Is there anything else that we got to touch on in terms of international?
Well, I would say,
news?
first of all, the minister's article. You got to check that out. We took an excerpt from one of his lectures, a great series of lectures
Time and What
from
Must Be Done.
2013, The Time and What Must Be Done. But this article is entitled Unmasking Satan and Exposing False Charges of Anti-Semitism. Got to read it for yourself. And the minister lays out and make the case about why we are not a hate group. And he again challenges those who have told these lies to prove their falsehoods. So read it. You definitely want to, just get a good understanding, a good spiritual understanding, a good social, political understanding. He makes the case for what's going on in the world from several different viewpoints, and we need all of those viewpoints. So make sure you read that. Go to finalcall.com right now. I hope it's up there. Is it up there?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
it's up there. It's
All
up
right.
there.
Okay,
It's up
good.
there.
So go there, read it, email it, print it out, study it, and just stay tuned, brothers and sisters. There's a lot happening in the world, and I know you got some stuff happening with Cardi B, and I know that Rob Kardashian and Black China then settled their little beef, and now they're going to be handling their little baby in joint custody. All that stuff is fine, but in addition to that, you got to have some idea of these other things that are happening in the world. Of course, we'd like to invite you to read our editorial called Dark Days, Dark Deeds at the Southern Poverty Law Center. And one of the questions that I raised is, why was this an open secret? That other people knew that the organizations had problems, but apparently Black people didn't know. And we the main ones suffering from hate in the country. And I would say our plight, if not the major way, but a major way to fundraise and talk about the presence of hate in this country. Yet somehow or another, we didn't know that some of these people are calling this operation a shame. So.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else you got for us?
that's basically it. Stay tuned. FinalCall.com. Final Call 40th anniversary. Stay tuned. Go to FinalCall.com and get your subscription. And I know we keep saying we got some stuff coming. Stay tuned and be patient. Maybe we'll do something. I think we did one before, but maybe we'll do another one just on the 40th anniversary and the
Yes,
history.
So that will be released before the close of the month, and we already started discussing.
Very good. We can do that.
We sat down, starting with, and what we want to do is on a weekly basis, or not on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, at least once a month, sit down and actually talk to those who are familiar with and know the history and have been involved intimately with the history of the Final Call newspaper, how it's impacted their lives. Maybe people who weren't necessarily intimately involved with the paper, but have intimately received benefit from it.
Absolutely.
So we want to talk about the history and the value of the paper, and want to offer you, at some point in time, we want to offer y'all an opportunity. Yeah, we want you to subscribe to the paper, but Brother Richard, we got to give people an opportunity to make donations to the Final Call as well.
We want you to make donations, and we want to set up an operation where we will also be able to hear your stories.
Yes,
we want
sir.
to hear from you in terms of what the Final Call has meant for you. And I mean, there's some incredible stories out there. Again, I heard part of a story that a brother told me. I'm not going to repeat any of it. It's that powerful that I think he needs to tell it for himself. So again, stay tuned, and we'll let you know how to donate. We'll let you know how to support. Right now, just start saving a little money. I'll just say that for now.
Yes,
Start
sir.
Put a few pennies away, because later on in a couple months there might be like a big fundraising dinner or a weekend, and you might want to come here. The Final Call 40th. It's only going to be one.
That's right.
You might want to be there.
Okay. Well, thank you once again.
Thank you, sir.
This is Behind the Final Call cover story, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
That's right.
Same time, same place. Oh, and of
don't
course,
forget the book.
you can't forget the book.
Yep.
Can't forget the book.
Social media, richardmuhammad.com. Pick it up. Let me know what you think. You can order it. Yeah. Good book.
Until next time, Behind the Final Call cover story. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, sir.